I'm Cecilia Gandolfo from the Institute for Community Inclusion at UMass Boston, and I'm part of the TASTE Center for the Region 1, which is the New England states. And Diane asked me to talk about some of the placement work that I did, and I used to be a provider agency working with folks funded under Voc Rehab. And so I've got a couple of cases I'd like to talk to you about. The first one is a woman that wanted to work in an office situation, in an office support kind of position. And she was a woman who had developmental disabilities, not a very good sense at all of what her capacities were. And she had mild to moderate developmental disabilities, as well as some mental health issues that she was dealing with. And so she had worked with a VR counselor and had come together with that person and had a plan of wanting to be in an office support kind of position. And again, she wasn't too good at understanding her disabilities or accommodation needs. There was a fair amount of denial about who she was, what her issues were, and she just hadn't accepted some of the level of support that she needed, and had a fairly strong sense of self, a strong ego, thinking she could handle a lot of different types of jobs that in fact she wasn't able to handle historically, but she didn't, the developmental disability prevented her from being able to self-critique and see any patterns. So part of working with her was to help her get into some jobs that felt like a good job match. I had to get her trust and get her interviewing for a number of jobs, and the first job she got in an office support kind of position was a good match for her, but she didn't want to accept the level of support she needed, and so pushed away the on-site support that was necessary for her. Even though I strongly suggested letting me come in or letting a job coach come in and give her some assistance in the development of a protocol of what her process was in her job. She didn't want that. She felt like she could take advantage of her supervisor's feedback, advice, work with coworkers, and figure out the job. And actually, the job didn't work out for her. Her supervisor didn't have the time she needed to support her, and she's pretty short-lived in that job, which was frustrating in terms of the placement work, especially in the current economy. You don't have a lot of luxury for failures. You really do try to place people into jobs that are going to give you the 26 ultimately of the successful closure. In working with her, though, she realized that I had gone along with it the way she wanted to, and part of it was I had to remind her that I had done it exactly the way she wanted to do it, and encouraged her to try something a little differently that I wanted to sort of my model for working with her, which was to let her meet some employers, find an employer that was amenable to my coming in and providing some support. She was going to be the one that interviewed and picked the employer, but we'd pick some, we'd have her have some interviews with people that were amenable to my involvement in that whole process, in the interviewing process. And again, she did the interviewing by herself, but they were aware of my role in her life as a support person, as an employment consultant. And so she interviewed for a few jobs. She was accepted by one. She actually liked the job. It was in a hospital setting. And this time she agreed to let things work my way a little bit, just to try it out. And I said, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And, the next one we'll do again completely your way. And she was happy with the fact that she selected the job. She interviewed with it. I wasn't in the room with her when she interviewed. She got the job successfully, but then agreed to let me come in and provide some employment support for her. So part of the lesson learned in working with her was, again, that trusting relationship. I needed to be with her through the failures. She needed to see that I was amenable to whatever it was that she wanted. And then through discussion and that conversation, she developed more trust in me and was willing to try out my approach. Again, doing everything identically to the way she had done it before, but then once the job started, she was in agreement that she would let me come in and look at the job and help her develop a plan for how she was going to do the job, worked with her and her employer and talked about the level of support that she'd need, which wasn't significant, but the supervisor needed to understand some of her anxiety issues and what would trigger them and what was the best way to deal with her when she was having some of these anxiety issues. And it worked out very well. She learned the tasks and did great in the job. The level of my job coaching was pretty minimal, actually. Once I did an initial assessment of the job, I needed to write the whole procedures manual, because the supervisor didn't have one for this particular job. So most of my job coaching was getting to know all the tasks involved, and then putting together a procedures manual, teaching her the protocol of using the procedure manual. Then as her responsibilities increased, I had to tweak it a bit and add more and more procedures. But she did pretty well with it. Once in a while, she or the supervisor would call me in when her stress level was high and something was triggering it, and it usually had to do with a coworker that came in and wasn't doing things the way they should be done for that employer. And the doctors realized that she was watching their best interest, and that when something bothered her, it actually wasn't a bad thing that it was bothering her. Someone was doing something the way it shouldn't be done. So they learned to, rather than get concerned when she got nervous about the work she was doing, look at what her concern was. Look at what issue she wanted to see addressed by the supervisor, because she was usually right on, saying, this person's not doing the job the right way. And at first they thought it was an interpersonal interaction, then they realized that she's right on, that person is shortcutting and some mistakes are being made. So it's kind of a nice learning experience for the employer. This woman to date is still employed in that position, so I think she's been in her position now for, probably about 15 years. She called me about 5 years ago, very concerned that she thought she was going to lose her job. The supervisor had changed, and I had been aware of the supervisor change. She and I sort of informally kept in touch with one another, about once a year she'd give me an update on how things were going. She called me up to say, I have a new supervisor, we've been working together for about 2 years, and it's been contentious from the get-go, and I'm really struggling with this, and I'm really nervous I'm going to lose the job. And I'm not sure if I should go back to, Voc Rehab and ask them to pay for you to come in again and do some job support. I need to talk to you about it. So we just had a couple of phone conversations, and I said, well, we may not need to work together on this. Let's talk about what's going on. I redirected her in terms of EAP services that were available through the employer, and how to handle the situation. And, I suggested that she mention to the supervisor that she was interested in bringing me back in, just to see how that would play out. She was going to do that, but it was interesting. Again, the doctors in this office, knowing that she usually watches out for what's going on, and they'd learned to trust her, realized that the issue that was going on with this particular situation was she and the supervisor weren't getting along, and that the worker's instincts were right, and that the supervisor was not managing things particularly well. And she called me a couple of weeks later. I'd sort of lost touch with where we were and whether I was going to come in at all. And she called me a couple of weeks later, totally elated that the supervisor had been fired, and that they were bringing in a new supervisor, and that the doctors brought her in an office and reassured her that she wasn't going anywhere, that they valued the work that she did, and that they felt like it was a bad match with this supervisor, which was, very just rewarding for this woman to see the relationship come to that level where the doctors said, we need you. And what's been kind of exciting in her 15 years in this role is that she has become the team leader. Now, in this office, she's a file clerk. That's the job that she does. But she's gradually learned to get into the medical records on the computer, so she's expanded the role slightly. And this office went from about 5 or 6 doctors to about 15 or so doctors, and so they have 2 different locations, 2 different file systems, and so they have support staff. She's considered the file clerk team leader, so whenever someone's hired into this job now, she does the orientation for the new staff coming in. And what's kind of cool is that she still pulls out the process I put together for her, and she'll call me up and say, I've trained another 5 people this year on your process, and it's still the same thing. I had to change a few things, but it's basically the same system that we've had all these years.